Here's Hanna Wheatley. Hanna is a researcher into the housing market at the New Economics Foundation. Unexplained wealth order, I suppose what it does says what it does on the packet, does it?
Yeah, that's right. So we've only seen these used once before since the powers came in 2017. But essentially, it gives the government the power to dig a little deeper to find out where the money's come from for these properties, where it thinks that there's kind of some money laundering going on.
Well, how restrictive is this? I mean, fair enough. I mean, they're basically saying, where did you get the money to buy this? And most people would be able to explain that. I mean, they'd be able to go and say, we got this from the mortgage company, the bank, it's my own wealth, here's the receipt for it, whatever. But here, these property orders may take a bit more explaining.
Yeah, that's right. And as we've only seen this used once before, it's still kind of quite uncertain about what the next steps look like. I guess the bigger question is how much of a widespread issue this is. And we've got lots of research coming through from Transparency International UK that show that, so this is 80 million in these three properties, but actually about 90 million estimated laundered money is run through the UK every year. So even though we've only seen this used twice before, it's quite a widespread issue, and it's especially bad in London.
Hanna, what would happen to the money if the person who was using it couldn't explain it away? What actually would happen to that money? Would it be returned to the original owners of the money, or what would happen to it?
So I'm not an expert on how exactly it works, but I know that if they can't provide kind of details about where the money's come from, then the properties can be seized. At the moment, they're just frozen, so they can't be sold or transferred. But the government can seize them if they can't produce evidence that they haven't been laundered.
So this is just we're talking about houses. You do often walk past a house that's so enormous, you think, who could possibly afford that house, and it looks like there's nobody in it. What other instances are there? Because there is this lady that we were talking about this morning on Sky, actually, who spent so much money just shopping. She was just basically shopping away all of her husband's money, and he is an Azerbaijani banker who was jailed, and it was a similar situation where she was just chopping away the money, getting rid of the money.
Oh, yeah, because if they spend it on things, then you can't trace it after that.
You can't trace it.
It's used. So
it's not just property, is it?
No, that's right. It's not just property. This case was with Harrods, I think.
Yes.
But it is in a large part to do with property, especially in London. So we see kind of massive luxury houses, as you said, left empty, and sometimes in a kind of state of disrepair. And that's because the owners don't particularly care about the homes or whether there's somebody in them, because they're just an asset. And so what we're increasingly seeing in the UK and in London in particular is homes being treated more as assets than as places for people to live.
Yeah.
And in the context of the housing crisis that we have in London, that's absolutely scandalous.
Well, it may well be scandalous, it may well be immoral, but it wouldn't necessarily be illegal unless the money was being laundered.
No, for sure. But it's definitely worth noting that we've got so the illegal money laundering is one side of things, but on the other side of things there's increasing numbers of homes that are owned by offshore companies, and so I think it's about 280,000 acres of land in the UK and Wales is owned by offshore companies, and many of those are left.
Give me that again.
280,000 acres.
Yeah.
And so while that might not be illegal, a lot of those homes are being owned for speculation purposes, so just to see increases in wealth. So we're seeing the world's super rich making money off homes that they're then leaving empty.
And where are the super rich coming from? What countries?
Actually, what's really interesting is that a lot of offshore-owned homes in the UK are owned by UK nationals who are just doing it through offshore companies. So we've seen, there are various responses to crack down on things like this. And we've seen in New Zealand, they banned foreign investment in property. And I actually think, and that's happened in a couple of other countries as well. But that's, there's kind of a strange xenophobia around that I think is really problematic and actually wouldn't tackle the problem, which we've seen in the UK, where many of these are owned by people who live here, but who are using offshore companies to avoid tax.
Hanna, in relation to the work that you do, explain this to me. You see, there are some countries, indeed there are probably some people listening to us talking now, and they would say, look, what's the problem? A service is being fulfilled here, money's coming into the country, it's entering the economy, why not just turn a blind eye to it? Why would you say it is important to clamp down on this?
I think it's quite a bad indictment of our kind of economy as a country if we're accepting either laundered money or offshore tax avoiding money and ownership of housing in the country, just to kind of continue to be competitive or to allow investment. That's at the expense of housing for people here who need it. We've got 1.2 million people on the waiting list for social housing. In London, we've got over 3 million people in the private rented sector, which is hugely unaffordable, hugely insecure, and actually in lots of places unsafe. So there are so many people with such a great need for homes, so many people who aren't ever going to be able to buy their own home anymore.
But these are houses that no one will be able to buy because they're so expensive.
Sure, but they push the prices up, not only in their kind of super rich luxury prime locations, but also in the rest of London, and then that trickles into the rest of the UK as well.
So as they say, land, they're not making any more of it. What you're saying, whoever buys that land at whatever level, price level that land is, if there's less of it, then there are people that are going to be the haves and the have-nots.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this is a really clear example of the kind of super rich using the haves, using London as almost a playground, a piggy bank, while there are people, homelessness is increasingly common in London and in other cities in the UK. And so we're really seeing this as a stark example of the haves and the have-nots.
Do you think this is the tip of the iceberg? Do you think we'll see more of these UWOs?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, Transparency International UK have said that there's a great deal more of this that we haven't followed up on yet, and they've got I think thousands of cases of properties that they've suggested that the NCA look into. So I think we will be seeing more of this particular power used, but I think there's a lot more that the government could be doing. So we need full transparency over land and asset ownership across the whole of the UK. We've got a land registry which is supposed to have mapped and held accountable all of the owners of land and property. They haven't done that yet for the whole of the UK. They're still missing quite a few, and even that information they have, you have to pay to get hold of. So we've got really bad transparency of ownership. I also think we could ban offshore ownership in this country to crack down on tax avoidance, and that would be a really strong move from the government. And then finally, I guess the housing crisis, which is the other side of this. The government needs to do a lot more in terms of building social housing, controlling rents, making London and the rest of the UK more affordable to live in.
Hanna Wheatley, thank you very much indeed. Good listening to you. Hannah works at in the housing market department at the New Economics Foundation. Thank you very much.